How's it going, fellow club members? This is Leo Damascus with the Steam Controller Fan Club, and today I wanted to take a look at and demystify activators, so you can make the most use of them in your configuration. Before we begin, I'd like to clarify that I'm trying to target this video towards beginners who have never used any activators before, but I am going to be going into a lot of depth, so if you aren't a beginner with activators, stick around anyway. You might learn something that you weren't aware of before. And I should also note that even though I'm using the Steam controller specifically in order to show this, activators are something that is compatible with any controller using the Steam configurators. So your DualShock 4, your Xbox controller, even one of those Logitech controllers, they're all going to be able to take advantage of this information. So first off, we need to talk about buttons. So every button that you press has three distinct states, apart from having the button not pressed. So the first state is the start press, which is what happens when you first press the button. Then there's the hold press, and that's what happens as long as you have your finger held down. And the last thing that happens is the release press, and that tells the program that you just released the button. And so games will often pay attention to all three of these and treat them in different ways. And activators, what they do is they allow you to interact with the buttons and change the way that Steam sends that particular information to the game that you are playing. So the first activator that we're going to be looking at is the regular press activator. And this one is the one that Steam will select by default, even if you don't have an actual activator selected. So what that's going to tell the program is when you push the button down, treat it as if you had a start press. As long as you're holding it, it's a hold press, and as soon as you release it, it's a release press. So nothing will change from the way that you are actually pressing the button. If we go down to start press here, what that's going to do is that's going to tell the program that as soon as you start pushing a button, it should send both a start press and a release press very quickly, depending on the delay. The release press is kind of similar. What that does is it holds off sending actions until it detects that the button has been released, and then it will send to the program that the button has started being pushed and then is released. So the other activators we have are the long press. That one is going to wait for you to hold it for a certain amount of time, and then once you've held it for that amount of time, it will immediately send that start press. So the last one that we have here is double press. Now what that's going to do is that's going to tell Steam to send all the information once a button is pressed twice. Another thing that is useful to keep in mind is that Steam will listen for this one until the second tap. So it can introduce a little bit of lag, but on top of that, there's some other neat things that you can do with that we'll be getting into later. The next thing that I want to explore is the different options that are associated with the activation types. First, let's look at toggle. Now what that does is, when it's active, it tells Steam to say that you're holding the button until the action is called again. So, for example, if I were to press the X button right now, if I had toggle on, it would say that I'm holding the X button until the next time that I press it. Interruptible. What that does is basically each activator has a different level of priority, and what Interruptible does is makes it so that if a low priority activator is bound to something and a higher priority activator happens to be called at the same time, if you have Interruptible on, only that higher priority activity will be called. But if you have Interruptible off, it will force both of them to be called. So that allows you to be able to stack up different kinds of activators. After that, we have the delays. Now, the delays will allow you to set how long after a button press that Steam says that you pressed it, and how long after it should stop sending the information that says that you're holding it. So for the fire start delay, if you want the button to wait a while after you press it before it starts sending information, you can do that there. And if you want it to say that it's holding for a specific amount of time, just crank this up, and that will make sure that it is still running even after you let go of the button. So next we have the haptics intensity. At least on the Steam controller, every single button and item has a small haptic motor behind it that creates a vibrating sensation. So you can set the intensity of how that motor goes off every time that you press one of the buttons. And that's done at an activator level. Cycle binding. What that's going to do is make it so if you bind multiple buttons to one activator, like say I wanted to also have this press the B button on the X button, if it will ever go over there. So now we have X button and B button bound. If I turned on cycle binding, rather than sending both the X button and the B button at the same time, every time I press the X button, it's going to trade off whether it's sending the X button or the B button. So you can use that if you want to, for example, have a button that toggles on a setting and another button that toggles off a setting, both bound to the same button. You can accomplish that there. Next is Turbo. So what Turbo does is, instead of Steam saying that the button is being held when you're holding it, it will tell the game that you are pressing the button rapidly. So let's set this back to just the X button here. If I were to turn on Turbo and hold down the X button, it would say, oh, he's pressing the X button a lot at a very quick pace. If you've seen one of those old NES Turbo controllers or something to that effect on a different console, that's the basic idea that you're looking at there. So I set up a couple of changes on this left grip button here to highlight two other facts. Aside from just button presses, the mode shifts, like this one on the left grip, are actually activators as well, and it will usually create an activator that you can manipulate when you create a mode shift. Right there. But even more importantly, you can also use activators to change the way that changing to a different action set works. So, for example, I have this one set to start press. If it were set to regular press, then as soon as I press this left grip and release it, it's going to change to this test configuration, so that if I press the left grip again, it will send one and then change back to the default. So if I were to go in here and change this so that it is a start press, instead, because it's going to switch over to that test action set when I start pressing it, once I get over there, it's going to detect another start press and that it's being held. And so it's going to be like I pressed that one from the default, and as long as I'm holding it down, all of these other controls are going to be active as well until I trigger this release press that goes back to the default. Using that, you can make different action sets behave kind of like advanced mode shifts. So that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind. And you can use that to change the way that your various action sets behave contextually based on the buttons that you're using. So another thing, I talked about different kinds of priorities with this interruptible thing. So let's go into that in a little bit more detail, because there are two different priorities, and the low priority ones will always have this interruptible, while the high priority ones will not. So you can see both of the low priority ones are the release press. And actually, does the long press have that too? No. So we have the regular press and the release press. You can set those to be interruptible. And if the Steam controller gets one of the other buttons that it detects, like say this double press, we turn this interruptible on, then when you double press, it's not going to mode shift the button pad. But if I were to turn it off, it will anyway, even if I do double press. So one interesting thing about that is that because the double press is something that listens for a long time, and it's also something that has a higher priority than a regular press or a release press, it's actually something that you can use to interrupt things. Let me show you my Darksiders configuration to give you an idea of what I mean here. If we go to the in-game controls, I have several different activators here. The first one enters aim mode for the game, which basically allows you to more finely aim something. I have that set to activate on start press and then again on release press, because that enter aim mode thing is going to toggle whether or not you're aiming something, and I wanted it to be able to let me hold down in order to aim something quickly, and as soon as I released it, I wanted to have it exit that aim mode. But at the same time, there are times when I just wanted to be able to enter the aim mode and stay there for a while, and I wanted that to happen if I just quickly press it once. So what I did was I added this double press, and it's set to send more or less nothing. And so what that's going to do is that the game is going to be listening for that double press when I press that start press, and it's going to send that, but the release press is interruptible. So if that double tap time passes and then it sees the release press, it's going to exit the aim mode as soon as I let go of the thing. But if I'm quicker than that and it only detects the start press, that's going to cause an interrupt on the release press and allow me to stay in there until the next time that I lightly tap it. So that's one example in Darksiders of how you would be able to use activators. So let's go into a different game so that I can explain some other good use cases that you might run into with this. Let's take a look at Dark Souls 1, actually. There we are. Now, I have a fairly complicated control scheme, but one of the things about Dark Souls 1 that's different from the other ones is that they have run and dodge set to the same button depending on whether or not you held it down. And that means that they can only detect a dodge on release, which makes the dodge a little bit sluggish compared to the other ones. So what I did to work around that is I set dodge to be its own thing with a start press with no delay, so that way, even if I'm holding in the thing, it's going to immediately say, oh hey, he released the dodge button, and so it will dodge right away. It makes it a bit snappier. On the other hand, I have over here this outer ring binding is set to hold down the B button, and it's not something that I've actually used in this case, but you can try to set it to just keep holding down the button so that there's no chance that it will trigger the dodge. It's not something that comes up very often though, so I wanted the run to respond a little bit better. And of course, over here with the jump, I have it set to quickly release the jump with the mode shift over there, and then it will wait a little while and then quickly press the B button again in order to activate the jump. So that's another way that you might be able to use your activators to do those kinds of complex things or allow buttons to respond more responsively. Let's look at another one that I've used activators for. Arkham Origins. Now, one of the things that's important about this game, if you want to set up a touch menu or a radial menu for all of the different kinds of items, normally a touch menu or a radial menu is going to have an instant reaction, and this game listens for those quick button presses as a way for you to quickly fire a batarang or the bat claw. So normally if you try to do that, what that's going to do is force your menu to quick use every single one of them. And maybe you want to save your batarang so that when you're switching to it, you're not going to alert people of where you are. So for that, I use the fire start and end delay to make sure that it's specifically not going to be a quick press when it's used from the radial menu that I have it set to. So in that way, I'm able to use the activators to avoid that kind of a quick activation. So the last thing that I want to look at as far as examples for what you can use an activator to do is to string together these kinds of complex things. Let's look at this one because it's easier to look at. Normally, you can't bind one button to be able to press the same button multiple times in a row. But if you chain together multiple activators, you can see I have one G there, and then another G there set to be pressed a little bit later, and then it finishes off with a second return. That allows me to quickly send to chat the phrase GG, which stands for good game. So that way, I'm able to, in my Heroes of the Storm configuration, just quickly send chat messages to the other people on my team. And you can see that I have a lot of these kinds of complicated ones that I can send to people. So that's another reason why you might want to consider using activators for those multiple button presses and complicated chains of events. And that's pretty much it. If you've gotten up to here, you should be more or less an expert on activators now. Go out and play with them yourselves. They will greatly power up your Steam controller configurations and make them much, much more useful and much, much more to your taste. Even sometimes if it's something that the game isn't expressly designed around. So with that, this club meeting has come to a close. This is Leo Damascus, and I'll see you at the next meeting. Take care, guys.